Readers at home can follow a short story along the right of the screen. Now, let's play Pauper with Adventurous Impulse. Titus Lunter illustrates the new card from Dominaria. Many consider it an additional copy of Ponder, but in green. However, it only searches for creatures or lands, making us have a very linear approach to the use of this sorcery card. Therefore, any non-creature spells we include in the deck must have great utility. Dispel helps protect our creatures, our hand, and ourselves from many instant spells. Unbridled Growth, an enchantment typically played on one of our forests, helps fix our mana base that is heavily geared towards green, while at later games allows us to draw a card. Two turn 1 plays using creatures helps us smooth our mana base. Again, acknowledging our commitment to green in the early and mid games, Arbor Elf helps untap a forest, while Embodiment of Spring provides a great small blocker, and later an ability to get more lands. Our two druids help us search for land and other cards. Luckily, we might either get a land onto the battlefield from Coiling Oracle, or a +1/+1 counter on our human druid as it explores. Fierce Empath is searchable from an Adventurous Impulse, and itself can begin to chain into finding an additional large creature for the mid to late game. Although it only has 1 power and 1 toughness, Fierce Empath has already served its role when it comes into play by finding us a large creature. Durkwood Baloth is one such creature for which we may hunt. If caught in the early game, we may cast this beast for a single green mana and wait 5 turns later for a 5/5 with haste. Foreshadowing things to come, Eldrazi Sky Spawner gives us an unusual creature. This one has flying, as well as giving us a token that can either block or help us fix our mana. Our final 2 creatures are Eldrazi. Wretched Griff and It of the Horrid Swarm both give us 4 toughness. Wretched Griff draws us a card while also flying. It of the Horrid Swarm brings an additional point of power, 4, while also giving us 2 1/1 green insect tokens. We begin to overwhelm our opponent with the number of creatures we have on board, while being able to block well. The emerge mechanics both Eldrazi offer us help reduce their casting cost and make them great searchable threats for Fierce Empath. As our story concludes, we now consider our sideboard options. All of these help us stay viable by preventing damage or smaller threats until we can get our larger, more specifically, our Eldrazi on board. And finally, we consider our land base. We use Simic Growth Chamber and Thornwood Falls to help smooth out our lands needed with both green and blue, while we run a few number of lands, our converted mana cost, as well as our emerge or Fierce Empath or other creatures who help us find land, help smooth this out into a good formula to field early creatures and later large threats. Now, let's test this deck in an online match. Hello, I am Pauper. As my name suggests, I'm a father who plays Magic the Gathering. As we begin Game 1, please consider subscribing to my channel to keep informed of new, innovative decks in the Pauper format. We begin the game with several options for early threats that help us also fix our mana base. Fielding 3 threats by turn 2 feels like an amazing start, but our opponent plays an enchantment that really restricts how many creatures we can play in this game. Note how Trespasser's Curse already affects our game strategy, but we have 2 power in the air. Our opponent plays a camel, and the first of which many we will begin to see against a CAMEL Tribe. This just underscores how innovative and new the Pauper format can become. We're able to land our Wretched Griff and draw a card very early in the game, suggesting how powerful this strategy may play out. Our opponent plays 2 implements, but currently lacks the green mana to trigger them at sorcery speed. So we begin to attack through the air. Note that we have Dispel in case they may try to attack our creatures using an instant spell. The creature now has lifelink and an additional power and toughness. We see another camel and a unique use of a tribal strategy, this time lending itself from goblins. We must block the lifelink creature while swinging in for some impressive damage of our own. I want to be able to field more blockers, not knowing how they may use that implement of ferocity. At worst, we can start searching for lands and thinning our deck for more threats. Our opponent plays a unique option here, again with a camel, and begins fielding some tokens of their own. Although I know we will begin to take damage from Trespasser's Curse because we've added 3 creatures on board, I wanted to be able to block the camel and prevent the lifelink from connecting to us. In hindsight, this may not have been the best strategy because they finally dropped their last +1/+1 counter and having gained an additional +1/+1 counter from yet another camel. At this point, I really begin to wonder if we can pull away. Although we do have many evasive threats, I don't believe the exchange will be positive in our favor. My children enjoy watching this match, and we're sadly rooting for the camels. But again, I really applaud my opponent for innovation. Here, we just simply wait to see how they may finally do something, and I wanted to see what we may be able to get off of Ixlani's Diviner to test this card further. Now, we go into match 1, game 2. We needed more lands than what we initially had, so we mulliganed, but believe we'll be able to have enough mana, now with Coiling Oracle, to get whatever threats we may need. Here, from the sideboard, we bring in a way to stop their camels. And again, Trespasser's Curse. Looks like it's going to be a curse true against us. We now have reasonable mana and can be looking for other threats. Thankfully, we'll be able to use our serrated arrows and begin to ping away at the lifelink camel. I like how the use of deserts, a newer archetype for Pauper, gets to see some play. I had considered using Dispel against their instant spell, causing them to not only lose the camel, but not draw cards. I wanted to save it for something that might be directly targeted against us. Sadly, that spell is a sorcery one, and we cannot use Dispel against it. I wonder if we'll see more use of that spell over Chainer's Edict from decks that want to commit to a larger mana base over its creatures rather than instants or sorceries or need for flashback. We're able to discard a few cards and got another fog anyway. Wretched Griff comes down quite handily. Would have been nicer to have been able to have emerged that off for a lesser cost. That way we could have kept Dispel open. But we'll see how well we do now. Should we need to sacrifice something in the future, at least we won't be losing our Eldrazi Sky Spawner because I used one of the Dispels to stop that. Our opponent wisely used his sideboard against us. Now we will use the Dispel, causing them to not draw cards, and we can lose a forest in that exchange. As long as we continue to apply pressure, we should be able to maintain our tempo. Thankfully, we do not have to worry about more lifelink at this time. And with the embodiment of spring, we now have another card should we need to discard something. As we see another Wretched Camel come into play, we can get rid of it and lose a card safely. Having used all of our serrated arrows, counters, we need to sacrifice it. And here the camels continue to come. Our opponent is running low on cards in hand, but I'm slightly concerned about how many cards they have been able to draw, which makes this 3-color deck interesting. We now face 2 large camels and cast the first of our fogs, while we continue to mightily strike against our opponent through the air. And finally, when they commit so much, we simply cast Fog, or can take some of the initial damage, luring them into a false sense of security. Our opponent concedes that game, and we begin the final of our match. Note that in both games, I sided out Fierce Empath, and chose to use our own creatures that ramp into mana. This deck is still evolving, although not using that keyword mechanic. What additions or subtractions may you have made? I must play very wisely to the clock, making so many choices about what and when to play. I am significantly behind on time. Fortunately, we do not see another Trespasser's Curse, so can commit to the board with aggression as frequently as we can. I had considered Muldrifter, but found that during playtesting, its use of Evoke only landed a creature in the graveyard, and I would rather have Sky Spawner for its 2 power, the same amount of power in the air. Now we are in a race against time and against lifelink. Our Baloth is continuing to count down the time of suspension, and I'm feeling hopeful we can get it resolved and cast with haste in order to make a dent into this growing life total with lifelink. Thankfully, serrated arrows helps nullify some of the damage. Again, I could have prevented that card draw, but in hindsight we'll find this becoming to our advantage. As expected, we now have a 5/5 with haste and begin largely taking out chunks of our opponent's life total. Perhaps it was smart that we didn't use that Dispel earlier, being able to prevent 2 instants that targeted our Sky Spawner and us applying more pressure as we field yet another creature with flying and take out more and more damage from our opponent until such time they concede the game with less than a minute with us on the clock.
What new stories will your cards and friends tell? Until next time, this is Pappy Pauper, encouraging you to be uncommonly magical.